Hey guys, it's Dr. Childs here, and today I want to talk to you about a supplement called Guggul or Guggul extract. I want to talk about how it can benefit your body. So specifically, we're going to be talking about how Guggul impacts your thyroid and how it can potentially help with weight loss and a couple of other benefits. In fact, we're going to go over 5 reasons that you might want to consider using it. But first, let's just start with some basics. So what exactly is Guggul? So Guggul, spelled G-U-G-G-U-L, or Guggul extract or Guggulsterone, are all kind of names for the same thing, and that is an active ingredient which is found within this herb from a tree or the tree sap in India. Now, I can't remember the exact name of that tree, so you just have to trust me that it's from a sap. It has a long, kind of funny name. But it's been used in Ayurvedic medicine for centuries, so for a long time. And it's has a lot of potential benefits here, and so I've used this image to illustrate some of those. For instance, it can help lower the cholesterol, which is hypolipidemic, has some anti-obesity effects, can fight acne, is stimulating to the thyroid, acts as an antioxidant, is cardioprotective and liver protective. So it has a lot of benefits. And what you'll find, or what I found as well, is when we look at a target nutrient or a target supplement, and it shows that it has a lot of benefits to many different systems, one of two things is probably happening. So it's probably working at a cellular level, because remember, a lot of something like inflammation, let's say, is at the root of a lot of various conditions. So if you can target that inflammation, you're going to affect a lot of different conditions. And so that's probably how Guggul is working primarily. So in that way, it's probably impacting a lot of other systems. And then another important point to consider is when you have a supplement which is treating so many different diseases, it's usually not the best treatment for any single one of those things. And so what I mean by that is it's great if you have multiple sets of symptoms, or if you're using it in combination with other supplements, because then it can augment the effects of Guggul and it can potentially help you further. So keep that in mind as we talk about it. Also, there's lots of studies here. If you want to come and look at my site, I link to them. So we'll be talking about a couple of these, but just so you know, they're all here. So let's talk about the 5 benefits and why you should consider using Guggul extract in supplement form. So number 1, I think it's one of the most important, and that is that it has, well, let's call it either thyroid stimulant, or it's a thyroid stimulant potentially, or it can boost thyroid function. Now, what's interesting about these studies is that the majority of studies that were done that show that it's beneficial to the thyroid were done in animal models, so primarily rats and rodents. Now, we always have to start testing things on rats and rodents and things like that before we test them on humans. But just because they work in that population doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily work on humans. However, there seems to be some link between the two. So, for instance, if we test it in mice or rodents that something helps potentially boost the thyroid, and then we test it in humans and we can't seem to find the same benefit, it's usually some benefit but to a lesser degree, and sometimes even more. And so what I found here is that the studies potentially done in rodents can show that it does increase thyroid function in these animals, and I have seen a similar benefit, but probably not to the same degree, in humans, and that's from my own clinical experience in using it. But just so you know, it can potentially boost the thyroid, but these studies were done in animals. Number 2, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. But number 2, it can potentially help with weight loss. Now, these studies were done in humans, and there have been some studies that show that people who were taking Guggulsterone, so this was a study that was done in 78 patients who have metabolic syndrome, and they tested before and after. And afterwards, they found that those people who took Guggul had improvements in their blood sugar and the amount of stress that was there, in their cholesterol, their BMI, and their body weight as well. Now, and you can read more about this study if you want right here. Now, the amount of weight that they lost was not necessarily, it was statistically significant by the study standards, but it wasn't a huge amount. And what I mean by that is it was probably 2 to 4 pounds. Now, you might not get excited about 2 to 4 pounds, and I wouldn't necessarily blame you. However, it is important to realize that weight was lost without doing any extra therapy. So that's always beneficial. And what that means is whatever Guggul was doing in the body of those people who took it, it was benefiting, it was working to reduce probably inflammation and other things that were causing the weight gain to begin with. And so I wouldn't recommend it as a single isolated supplement used for weight loss. However, if you have some of these other problems like thyroid disease and weight gain, that's when it starts to get interesting, because now it's working on 2 separate systems. Number 3, it reduces inflammation. So chronic low-grade inflammation, as I stated previously, is implicated in a lot of disease processes, and it's at the root or the heart of a lot of disease states. And so if you can do anything to reduce inflammation, you can potentially benefit a lot of systems in the body. And how this works in the case of Guggul is it seems to inactivate or at least slow down the activation of a factor that's called NFKB, which stands for nuclear factor kappa light chain enhancer of activated B cells. So it's quite a mouthful. So we're just going to call it NFKB. But what I can tell you is that the activation of this guy is seen in high amounts in a bunch of autoimmune diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis, atherosclerosis, which is the development of cardiovascular disease, and it's kind of how you start the heart attack and how you start strokes, COPD, asthma, MS, IBD, which is inflammatory bowel disease, and of ulcerative colitis. So if you can stop the activation of NFKB, you might potentially be able to reduce inflammation and therefore benefit many of these systems. Okay, we'll talk about inflammation in just a minute here, but that just so you understand that it is impacting inflammation at the cellular level, it seems to. Number 4 is it can potentially improve cholesterol, and it does this through 2 ways. So number 1, I said before, remember when we talked about it helping with weight loss, we said it's helping to reduce inflammation, insulin resistance, and metabolic syndrome. And all of these things increase your cholesterol potentially and increase your risk of heart attack. So if it's treating those things, then it's automatically going to be doing something to your cholesterol most likely. So that's number 1. And then number 2, it seems to help your body eliminate or metabolize the cholesterol and get it out of your body as well. And so it's kind of acting in 2 separate ways for your cholesterol. Again, it's not a huge impact, but it is worth considering at least, especially if you have obesity that's complicated with metabolic syndrome, which then you have thyroid disease, and then you're overweight and all of these things. So once you start adding these things together, and they all tend to go together, the more likely Guggul is to potentially benefit you. So that was number 4. And then number 5, so this one isn't necessarily related to the other ones we were talking about, but I think it's still important, and that is that Guggul can potentially help fight and treat acne, especially if you have nodular acne. So this is the kind of the more serious form of acne, not the lighter versions of acne, but if you have the deeper, cystic or nodular acne, this is a potential therapy that you can at least look into. And this probably works again, like I said before, by impacting the inflammatory levels in your body, and then also by impacting testosterone and testosterone activation of some of your skin cells and the sebum production and so on and so forth. So the amount of oil that your skin produces. But anyway, that's a potential thing to consider because acne is a very hard thing to treat, especially if it's cystic or nodular. And so if you have any extra tools that you can use to fight it, it's good to know about those. So let's talk about how to use it for just a second here. So I've come up with a list of people that I think benefit the most from using Guggul. Now remember, I think it tends to work better in those people who have multiple sets of issue. So for instance, if you just have, we'll talk about it here. So patients who have pretty much any form of thyroid disease, so that includes hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, or those people who have thyroid conversion issues, meaning they can't really take T4 to T3 that well, then Guggul is potentially beneficial there. And the reason for that is it's working at multiple levels with inflammation, which we know is a potential modulator of T4 to T3 conversion, and it also high levels of inflammation is of course seen with Hashimoto's. So pretty much any thyroid disease, you have some potential benefit by using Guggul, especially with how it works directly on the thyroid gland itself. This is even true for those people who don't have a thyroid. So if you still fall into that category, it's still worth considering because you still have to convert T4 to T3, and inflammation can still inhibit that process. So that's number 1. That group of people should definitely consider using it. Number 2 would be those people who have known or suspected chronic low-grade inflammation. So a lot of you may know or suspect that you have inflammation if you have joint pain, or if you just don't feel very well all the time, and if you have obesity or you suffer from being overweight, you probably have some inflammation in your body, and that's potentially beneficial. We talked about number 3 before, which was the nodular cystic type of acne, so it's a good reason to use it. Number 4 would be people who have obesity, secondary especially to other hormone imbalances such as leptin, insulin, and thyroid imbalances. So remember, you don't want to use Guggul on its own to treat your weight loss. However, it can be a good complement to other medications, to other supplements, to diet, to exercise. So if you combine all these things together, that's how you really start to see a lot of weight loss, and weight loss that stays off for a long period of time, hopefully forever. And then lastly, people who have high cholesterol, but people who have high cholesterol especially secondary to metabolic syndrome. So I wouldn't use this as like your main treatment if cholesterol was your main issue, but if you have some of these other things that we talked about, like thyroid disease and high cholesterol, or obesity, thyroid disease, and high cholesterol, that's when you start getting more benefit from using Guggul. So how do you use it? The dose that you're going to want to look for is anywhere between 100 to 200 milligrams per day. That's usually a sufficient amount. You don't necessarily need a lot of it because remember, it can be combined with other supplements, and that reduces the total amount of Guggul that you'll need to experience those benefits. And so that's kind of how I recommend that you use it. And for that reason, I put it in my T3 conversion booster with a lot of other things such as vitamin A, vitamin E, zinc, and selenium. So all of these things together I think really help improve thyroid function, and that's why I put it in there. So I think this is kind of, in my opinion, the best way to use it. You use it in combination with other things, and that's how you get the biggest bang for the buck. So you can use it like that. If you're using it for weight loss, you're again, don't use it primarily for that, but use a higher dose. So you're going to need probably 200 milligrams, and for probably a 3 to 6 month time frame, but use it with other therapies as well. If it's for inflammation, you're going to want a lower dose, so about 100 milligrams per day, and you're going to want probably a longer time frame. So it may be 6 months plus or around that range, but that's how you're going to want to think about using that. And lastly, Guggul is very safe. I haven't seen anyone react negatively to it in the past, so that's something to keep in mind. If ever there's a therapy which is, you know, the benefits outweigh the risks, then you always want to consider taking that, especially if your doctor or whatever isn't willing to work with you or you're not sure where to turn next. So anyway, that was pretty much it. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. There's a lot of information about Guggul. I would say there are a fair amount of studies on it, but like I said, some are in animals, some are in humans, so you kind of have to tease out the difference. I've tried to put this all together for you because I've done a lot of the experimenting on patients and on myself and on others, and so I'm trying to put all that information together in one place so you can kind of get a better idea of how to use it. But now I want to hear from you guys. Have you used it before? Do you have the problems we talked about? Do you have thyroid disease, or are you also struggling with cholesterol and obesity and all of these other conditions? Let me know if you have any specific questions about it. I'd be happy to answer them. Leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe and like it as well. And otherwise, I will see you guys in the next one.